Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Why Not Mindset. This podcast is about real, honest, and sometimes raw conversations. Here we talk about lived experience, second chances, mindset, and what it truly takes to rebuild after adversity. When the odds, can be stacked against you. If you are someone you know has been impacted by incarceration, trauma, addiction, or just life knocking you down, the space is for you. And if you are someone who wants to understand, support, and be a part of real change, you are in the right place. Go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. And as of that, we will go ahead and jump right into it. I'm really excited about this one. David Garlock. David Garlock is a national keynote speaker, criminal justice reform advocate. It says a research fellow, we'll get into that, but a TEDx Arcadia speaker. David, thank you for sitting down with me, man. I've been really waiting on this, man.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to join you on this conversation. I mean, one thing that's always amazing is to be on podcasts. I've probably done like 25 or 30, but each one is so different, because the person that you're talking with and then really where the stories go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I, for the people listening, David already knows that I met David during the beginning of last year when I just wanted to be a motivational speaker. I just wanted to share my story. And I reached out to Dave, and I'm sure Dave knows it, or he might not know it, or the people listening. Dave, you've been my mentor. I have reached out to David every time I have wanted to go in and speak at like a conference or my own conference, which David spoke at my conference and just knocked it out of the park. But every time I went and wanted to speak, I've reached out to Dave. It's like, hey man, I'm nervous. How can I do this? And you have just met and you've just coached me. You've been my mentor, especially when I started and got accepted to go into university. So I was like, hey, and you told me great advice. You said, you know what, when you're going in with these students, you want to grab these students and don't go in there with a script, which I had a script. When you told me that, I had a script that I was going to go in there and just read from. And you told me, you was like, don't go in there with a script. You want to grab these students. You want to take these students on a journey that you went through. You want to take them with you. And I just wadded up my script and took your advice, and just, it was amazing. So thank you so much for always being, whether you know it or not, being my mentor. Thank you for guiding me on this journey, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's kind of like what we talked about. I mean, if you go in there and you just read a script, or read a speech that you've done, yes, it's going to be powerful. But the students want more authenticity. They want you just to be able to have this conversation with them. That's how I present, and I'll tell them off the bat, like, hey, if you guys have a question, just ask me right now. You don't have to wait till the end. And I always tell them, if I finish my presentation, cool. If I don't care, because it's not about me being there just saying these words, it's about what I'm imparting to them, how are they responding to my story? What can they take away from my story as they go into whatever work that they're going to do, because the way I view it is a lot of times I'm speaking in a criminal justice class. So these kids are going to be the next public defenders. They're going to be the next defense attorneys. They're going to be the next governors, the
The
next legislators.
next generation of
They
change makers.
exactly, and that's what I want to do. I want to be able to pour into them. One of the most powerful compliments I got was I think it was like a year and a half ago. I was doing a Zoom with a colleague of mine at University of South Florida, where I had spoken like 2 years ago. So after I spoke, this girl was like, "Hey, I just want to say something." She's like, "I don't have a question. I just want to say something." And she's like, I heard you speak in person 2 years ago at South Florida. She's like, when I came to South Florida as a freshman, I wanted to be a prosecutor. I wanted to lock people up, throw away the key, and make them spend a lot of time in prison. She's like, after I heard your story, your experiences, and the work that you do, she's like, I want to be a defense attorney. And I'm just sitting there, I'm getting teary eyed, while I'm
Amazing.
hearing this because a lot of times, when we speak, we're always planting seeds. The thing about it is we don't always get to see what that seed yields,
Of
but when
course.
we're able to in situations like this, it just like blows our mind and we're able to see the impact that we're having, the impact that our stories are having, and that's why it's so important for people with lived experience to be able to go into universities, to go into colleges, to go into reentry conferences and share our stories, because we have the lived experience. We've been there, we've done that. We got the t-shirt and we got the certificate.
Of course. Of course. When you gave me the advice and I wadded up that script and you told me just sit down with them, just relate to them, just involve them. And I remember we talked a little bit about like an icebreaker. What was There's a couple stories. What worked for me the first time was they were kind of hesitant, but what broke the ice and got them going was me asking them the question. I was like, okay. I said, what the first one was, I said, what is the first thing you think you must do before you enter prison? And I told them the wrong answer is go up and find the biggest person and punch him. That's not it. That's not the right answer. And of course, they laughed. And then I went in and said, the first thing you must do is learn to desensitize your mind. And that was it. Now, the second time was kind of funny. I remember asking your advice on all this, but the second time I went in there and I said, there was I think there's about 35 students, but I had my suit on and I went in there and I said, I did federal time and I got released in 2010. Just looking at me now, what do you think my crime was? And a couple people raised their hand and they said something. I was like, nope, that's not it. One person, which was really funny, one person who was sitting way in the back, who had a stack and like a folder, a big stack of folder, and he raised his hand and he had like he did his research on me. He like he was already an agent. He knew my background, my story, and he was like, I know everything. I was like, okay, all right, wise guy, all right, all right, wise guy. But it was fun. We had fun.
That's why, I mean, like we had that conversation, I mean, I always love opening it up with that because when people see me walking in there, I'll walk in with my teal suit or my maroon suit. I have my Chelsea boots on, my two earrings in, and I ask them that. And 90 to 95% of the time, people will say fraud or white collar crime
Fraud.
because
That's what
they
they
see
said.
me, they see a white, well dressed, educated person. So it's got to be a white collar crime. It's got to be money, Then some people will be like, "Oh, drugs, you were slinging these drugs. You were this like kingpin, What's another thing that's always funny is like there'll be some people that are like Grand Theft Auto. I'm like, well, that's a good video game, but that's not actually a charge, it's carjacking or, and then they're like, wait, what? That's not actually a charge. It's like, no.
No, no, it's not. You
Um, what's funny too is I've done some presentations where the commute folks from the community have been in too. And one time I was up in Massachusetts at this school. And there was probably 8 to 10 older folks from the community there, and one of the ladies raised her hand and like, I know that you didn't go to prison for murder because you wouldn't be here if you did. I'm like, well, I'm glad you said that because that's what I went to prison for. And they're like, oh, it's like they started clutching their pearls and everything. Like, what? Like, and you're here?
Yeah, yeah. You spoke at my conference, the Be the Change Collaboration Conference, which was actually I hosted it on my Freedomversary. and you came in for about 10 minutes and just knocked it out of the park. I remember your speech. It was about using your scars for purpose. And I don't know if you just made it up on the spot or if you had it if you had it in your backpack, but it was powerful. I remember you got a standing ovation, and you just came in, sat down, and just laid it out there like you was just warming up a microwave dinner. You just came in, and so that's powerful. Um, I would like to jump right into it. I know a little bits and pieces about your story by looking at some posts and looking at this with you beside the Menendez brothers, but I know a little bit of here and there. But if it's okay, I would like to hear the story from you and just get right to it and not hear bits and pieces.
Yeah, so I always tell people, that if we had a pictorial dictionary right now and we looked up the Garlock family, the name and the title would be dysfunctional family, because that's what we grew up in. I don't really remember it, but when I was 3 years old, my brother, who was 6 at the time, and my sister, who was 8, we were put in foster care for 6 months because our parents couldn't manage us, and that was the whole of our childhood. Really no structure, no real parental guidance. Um, my dad and sister were constantly at odds. One of the earliest memories I have was when I was 5 years old. My brother and I were hiding underneath our grandmother's kitchen table, and my dad had a hacksaw blade threatening to kill my mom and my sister. And my grandma, who was my dad's mom, had to call the police on him, and he was taken to the psych ward. And these are just um instances, of the different trauma. And I mean, one of the conversations and presentations I do is called the trauma to prison pipeline, and that is the pipeline that affects more people than the school to prison pipeline or the foster care to prison pipeline, because so many people experience trauma. And even those that are impacted by the school to prison pipeline are actually impacted by that trauma to prison pipeline. And there's this test called ACEs. Adverse Childhood Experiences Test. 5 questions are about the child, 5 are about the household, and the more you score on that, the more likely you are to have medical issues, mental health issues, go to prison, addiction. You really want to score 0% on that. I mean, typically you don't want to fail a test, but this is one you want to fail. My brother and I, we scored 10 out of 10. And that just shows how much trauma and how much dysfunction we grew up in. My parents got divorced when I was 9. Yeah. Actually, before that, my sister was kicked out of the house too. And so, really, those were some of the things that led up to my brother and I ending up in this place where we were abused. So, after my parents got divorced, my dad got custody of us probably about 8, 9 months after that. And my brother was told by my dad that if he continued to drink and smoke marijuana, he'd be kicked out of the house. So at 13 years old, he was kicked out of the house.
Hmm.
We were living in Seattle, Washington at the time. That's why I got my Seattle swag on right now. Go Seahawks. He was kicked out of the house, and he went to a group home in Seattle. Just after that, just before that, there was a guy that got out of prison in South Carolina, moved to Washington, befriended the person running this home just so he could have access to young boys. And he started molesting my brother. This went on for a couple months, and then he forced my brother to move in with him. Probably a month after that, he took my brother down to California where my mom and stepdad were living to talk my mom and stepdad into moving back up to Washington. So this was done just so he could have access to me. So the first time I saw my mom was January 1st, 1991. I hadn't seen her in 2 years. So here a joyous time where I'm seeing my mom for the first time was supposed to be great. It was good for about the first 2, 3 hours. We were watching football, and then this guy's like, "Hey, let's go play hide and go seek." As an 11-year-old, that's what you do. You play hide and go seek, you play games, different things like that.
Mhm.
So I thought I found a good hiding spot, was in this closet. This person found me, and that's when he started molesting me, you know? So here it is, this day that was supposed to be joyous. I saw my mom for the first time in 2 years, and here it is, my innocence is being taken. Um, After I walked up the steps, this person pulled me to the side and told me if I ever told anybody, he would kill my family and me. So here it is, 11 years old, and this is what I'm being told, you know, "You're gonna die if you ever tell anybody." And so, my TEDx that I did in 2022 is called Beyond the Mask: Overcoming Trauma and Abuse. And it was right at that moment where I had to start creating these masks. I going home that night, I couldn't go home and tell my dad what happened because I now had this fear that we were gonna get killed if I did. And I didn't really have the wherewithal, you know, and knowledge of like, yeah, you know, you need to go tell somebody. You know, that's why I think now there's there needs to be more conversation about this, but there's more conversations about sexual assault, abuse, with kids and teens and stuff. So we definitely need more because the educational piece is what will prevent sexual assault and abuse. It's not just the registry or different things like that, you know, because most of the people who are committing sexual offenses right now are not even on the registry. The person who abused us wasn't on the registry, so this list wouldn't have prevented us from being abused. Um, so this abuse went on for 8 years, you know. Towards the end of the abuse, you know, it got a lot worse. This person had actually forced me to drop out of high school. So here it is. I had finished my first semester of my senior year in high school, 3.5 GPA. I had some football scholarships. I had a football scholarship to Boise State. I had a football scholarship to Fresno State, a couple other Division II schools in Southern California, and all that was thrown away. You know, he's like, "You gotta drop out of school." And, his thing was, "Yeah, you know, when we end up in Louisiana trying to find your mom, you can re-enroll in school," you know? So, here it is, you know, I'm thinking that, yeah, that's gonna happen. Never happened because that was the whole power and control that this person had over us, you know? And Um, towards the end, it became more physical and abusive. We'd get the crap beat out of us every time. We ended up from California, we ended up in Louisiana for a bit where our mom was, you know, and then we ended up in Alabama. And Alabama is really where, actually, in Louisiana, this person had tried to kill me once, and then Alabama it just became even more physical, more controlling, more possessive. My brother and I were working at this restaurant called Shoney's, and um, this individual would always tell people he was our half brother. Um, it's all about the manipulation and him letting people know that, yeah, you know, these are my little brothers. Let me know what's going on with them. And so it was just a way that he got into our lives to know every single detail. Um, when we went to work, it was like we were being released from prison. You know, it's kind of like in prison you have work release, you know, that's how I view it now, you know, like, wow, this was our work release, you know, we got to leave this prison of this abuse, and we were in the free world for a couple hours. We got to experience what life was like. We got to see other teens, and young adults and what life was supposed to be like, and at times I was very jealous of what these other kids had, knowing that they were going to go out and party with their friends. They were going to go to the high school football game. They were going to go do this and that. And I knew that when I walked back to that apartment, I was gonna get the crap beat out of me. I was gonna have to drink 4 or 5 drinks just to get through the night, and that was my coping mechanism, just drinking and drugs, that's how I dealt with the abuse. Um, then in June of 1999, it was a Monday night, we made the rational decision after a whole bunch of things that happened, and we took this person's life. Um, we didn't have a car, we didn't have any way to dispose of the body, so we had just buried the body in the backyard. And people always ask, they're like, "Okay, you did this. Did you feel free?" It's like, yes, but no. Because yes, I felt free because I no longer had this person like over me, tell me what to do, or at times standing outside that restaurant just watching us through the window, seeing what we were doing. But now I had this aspect where I had taken somebody's life and I can't tell anybody.
And how old were you when this happened? Took
I
this
was
life?
n I was 19.
Mm.
And so it took them 4 months to find the body, and so really my brother and I and the Menendez brothers are the only brothers that I know of that took the life of their abusers. And I really relate with them and the abuse that they endured, but then also the whole thought process, about people being like, oh, yes, they did it for the money because there was a 7-month period and they were doing this and that. It's like, okay, my brother and I had that 4-month period. We didn't have the money that the Menendez brothers did, but what we did was because we had to cope with the trauma, we had to cope with the aspect that we took somebody's life, and we couldn't just go tell somebody, because if I went and told somebody, what would have happened? I would have been arrested. And then October 29th, 1999 was when I was taken from my work, and taken for questioning. Here it is. I just turned 20, 24 days previously. Here it is, 20 years old, being taken in, committed a murder charge in Alabama. If you know anything about the dirty South, I'm thinking I'm going to get the death penalty. I'm thinking I'm going to get life without parole. And that was the fear that was running through my mind,
Mhm.
So we had just talked some, and then things led up to it. I partially confessed to the crime. And then they read me my Miranda rights, after I partially confessed. You know how police do it. They want you to just talk and like tell enough where they can hang you with, and then they're gonna be like, "Oh, by the way, you have the right to remain silent. Whatever you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. If you don't have money for a lawyer, we will provide one for you." It's like, why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? Um, and so there it is. I'm 20 years old and I'm taken to the county jail and I'm being booked in on a murder charge. I didn't know what the actual charge was. I didn't because Alabama's different than other states. Like here in Pennsylvania where I live, you have first, second, third, fourth degree murder, first, second degree manslaughter, other places. Alabama is not that case. Alabama, you have capital murder, which is the death penalty or life without parole. Then you have murder, which is a class A felony that carries 10 to 99 to life with the possibility of parole. Then you have manslaughter, which is class B felony, 2 to 20, and then justifiable homicide, which is class C felony, 1 to 10. I'm thinking we're gonna be charged with capital murder and get the death penalty. So that first weekend, I'm crying myself to sleep. I don't know what's gonna happen. The worst case scenario is I'm going to meet Yellow Mom. So Yellow Mama is the nickname for the electric chair in Alabama. And so that is what I'm thinking the whole weekend. So November 1st, 1999, I'm taken back to the city jail for more questioning. I put in this room for 7 hours by myself. So I'm thinking about the abuse, I'm thinking about the murder, thinking about everything that transpired. Called the detective in and just told them everything, totally confessed, and that was this big weight taken off my chest because here it is. I could now talk about the abuse. I could talk about taking somebody's life. I no longer had to hold it. I no longer had to just keep it in. So they videotaped it, and the thing that really changed the whole trajectory of my life is what happened next. The detective takes me to his car. We're heading back to the county jail. I look at him. I'm like, "Hey, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole?" He turns to me. He's like, "Do you believe in God?" I'm like, "Okay, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole?" He's like, "Do you believe in God?" I'm like, "Okay, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole?" He's like, "Do you believe in God?" I'm like, "Yeah, I believe in God." And he's like, "You need to seek him now." And that conversation just changed the whole trajectory of my life because it was then that I told myself that I was going to do the time instead of letting the time do me.
Wow, that is something else. What is going was your brother involved in this? Was he arrested at this time, or was it just you?
So I was arrested at this time. My brother was arrested 3 weeks later in Florida. A week after the murder, my brother and a girl that we had been working with, they started dating and they left. Um, Now, if I had left too, I don't think we would have ever been arrested. But because I stayed there in Alabama, that's how they put it back to my brother and me. Um, Because something that was really interesting that we didn't know is when we pled out to the offense, so we had court appointed lawyers who were pitiful, didn't do anything for us. I wish we had public defenders because if we had public defenders, they would have actually fought for us. I love public defenders. I have a lot of colleagues that are public defenders, and they always get the bad raps about the system because they're overworked and underpaid. But if you are a public defender, know that I'm sending you big hearts. I love you. I love your work and your passion. But we had two defense attorneys that had to do these cases. And in Alabama, a court appointed lawyer in 1999 only got $1,000 for the whole case.
There's
So
not very much
imagine,
motivation there.
no, I mean, our lawyers were on our case for 15 months. How much money do you think they made a month? $70 a month, $73 a month for our case. No, there's not going to be motivation. There's not going to be any drive or desire to do anything, and they didn't. And um, so we took a plea deal. They came to us and told us the only plea they were going to give us is a 25-year deal. We were very green to the system. We didn't push back. We didn't say, okay, try to go get us another thing. Another thing too is like in 1999, just like the Menendez brothers case, none of us were looked as victims. We were only looked at as an offender. We weren't looked at as children who were sexually and physically abused for these years and felt the only way out of this situation was to take the person's life. And there's this thought process and this thing called survivor homicide. And it's those individuals who take their life of their abusers to escape the abuse. Since 2020, there's been a tiny shift where the criminal legal system is beginning to look at the duality of somebody being both a victim and an offender at the same time, where back then there was no understanding of that or really comprehending it, you know? And then the fact that, hey, wait, how can boys be abused? You know, I mean, there was all kinds of thoughts around that too.
Women only.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but when our court-appointed lawyer, you know, was telling us about the plea deal, there's two things I'll never forget about this conversation. One is he's like, you know, hey, David, if you have to serve all 45 years, you'll still be a young 45 when you
40,
get out.
45 years.
He's like, "You'll be a young 45 when you get out." I'm 21 years old, and he's telling me like, "Yo, it's only 24 more years you could potentially do. You'll still be young." It's like, I can't comprehend that. It's like you're telling me I could potentially spend more time in prison than I've actually been alive to this point. It's like, what? And then the second thing that really baffled both my brother and me is they told us that, you know, if we had never confessed, they would have never been able to arrest us because they didn't have any DNA or dental records of this individual. So our confessions actually put us in prison.
Telling the truth of of the trauma and the in my life, I bounced around quite a bit because my mom had a hard time. So I really never had childhood friends. I traveled from California to Iowa to Alabama to Georgia, just moved. I mean, every year. So I never had friends. We moved all the time. And I was stuck with a couple family members who were abusive to me, but not in the way you're talking about. Just they just beat me. They just beat me. But wow, man. Wow. That's that how much time did you end up having to do?
So I served 13 and a half years. And so I got out April 1st, 2013. Actually, really what helped both my brother and me is Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative started working with us in 2008. One of the people I knew in prison was a client of his, and they helped both my brother and I get out of prison on parole. But also, subsequently, both my brother and I have received pardons from Alabama, which is like winning a $1.6
That's
billion
amazing.
Powerball.
Yeah.
Um, because, you know, getting a pardon for murder in Alabama is rare.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to talk about. After after you just telling me that your confession is what got you arrested and you did 13 years, then you fought and you got pardoned. What was that like? Stepping out, being pardoned, being told, okay, you wasn't guilty. 13 years later, we're going to let you out. No harm, no harm, no foul. That has to be, of course, of course, exciting, fair, but at the same time, well, I just lost 13 years of my life, and you're giving me a pardon. What's going on in your mindset right then?
I mean, the pardon didn't happen until 2021. So I was actually on parole for over 8 years. So here it is, probably 20 and a half, 21 years after the offense. In the Alabama is different than a lot of states. Alabama's parole board is actually the pardon board too, so they do both parole and pardons. And you actually have to stand before this pardon board and tell them why you deserve a pardon. I'm gonna tell you that when I was standing before this pardon board, I felt like I was on trial because the chairwoman is a former prosecutor and she was very vindictive, very harsh. I don't think she wanted anybody ever to get parole or pardon. And she wanted me. She started this off by giving her an allocution. When I talk to people later, they're like, allocution doesn't happen at your pardon hearing. Allocution only happens in your trial, and that's where you have to go through and tell them everything that transpired. And so she was treating this as a trial, and the thing that I always like, I'm very adamant about is parole and pardons isn't about the offense that you committed. Parole and pardons are supposed to be about what you've done in prison, what you've learned, what you're doing in life now. But too many of our parole and pardon boards always go back and only want to focus on the offense that you committed, which
Crime.
which is a small percentage of what you're to look at, but you're to look at who the person is now. And so here it is. I'm standing before the pardon board. I'm telling them the different things I've done. I had a page and a half letter from my parole agent that I'd had for like 8 years. And I'm talking about when he sent me the letter he wrote, I got teary eyed because it was such a powerful letter, and the way that this person who had been overseeing me for these 8 years viewed me and looked at me was so powerful. He didn't view me and look at me as somebody who went to prison for murder. He looked and viewed me as this agent of change who was impacting people wherever I went and spoke, but also impacting other parolees that he had, and that was so powerful. And so here it is. I'm sharing my story, explaining everything. And one thing that really baffled me was one of the pardon members he asked me this really poignant question. He's like, "Do you believe that your situation was domestic violence?" And immediately I'm like, "No, I wouldn't think that." And then he broke it down. He's like, "Were you in a situation where you could not leave, where you were getting beaten and you were getting abused and you were isolated from society?" And I'm just like, snap. This
Mhm.
was a domestic violence situation, relationship. And I mean, what the reason I said no immediately and so like powerfully was I was like, okay, domestic violence is a relationship you choose to be in, and all of this stuff happens. I never thought that this could be viewed that way. And so I was like, wow. And another thing that really baffled me is I've done a lot of work advocating for people who've committed sexual offenses since I've been out of prison and graduated from college. And there was actually a victim's advocate saying that I shouldn't get a pardon. And this is something that really baffled me. It's like, I was a victim and I took the life of my abuser. Why is the victim's advocate advocating for me not to get a pardon? And this woman's like, I was abused as a child too, but I didn't take the person's life. And there was nobody to advocate for the person whose life you took like you do now, And I was actually given the opportunity to come back up to the podium and to talk about the work that I do, advocating for people who've been convicted of a sexual offense, And that work that I've done there and continue to do, I look at it as restorative justice, because as a victim, I'm able to help these individuals who've committed sexual offenses heal because most of the times they're not going to be able to talk to the person that they've harmed. So I get to be that victim by proxy to help them heal, to have conversations they wouldn't be able to have. And these are things I was able to talk about and discuss. And they went back for like an hour and a half to deliberate on my case, but then also the other three parole cases they heard. And they came back, and the chairwoman, you could see that she was not happy.
Mhm.
And she's like, "Your pardon is granted 2-1." She needed to make me aware that she was the one no vote. And she's like, you're getting all your rights back, except you cannot possess a gun. You're not getting your gun rights back. If you want to get those back, you can go through this whole process again, you know? And I'm thinking, okay, I live in Pennsylvania. I got a bow and arrow, learning how to hunt. Why do I need a gun, you know?
Mhm, mhm. Wow. That's I'm I'm taking it all in. That's powerful. What wow. What what drove you or made you to decide I'm going to start sharing my story? What was that drive that said, "You know what? I'm gonna start."
Well, I mean, I really it wasn't an idea like, oh wow, this is something I'm gonna do, you know. It was my senior year. It was March of 2017. My one of my criminal justice professors, she was an adjunct at Eastern University where I got my degree at. She was also teaching at LaSalle University, which is a college in Philly. She's like, "Hey, David, I know y'all have spring break next week. Do you want to come speak in two of my classes?" I was like, "Sure." And so, I mean, me personally, in a class, if I had a choice between writing a 10-page paper, doing a presentation, or taking a test, I'm doing a presentation every time. I'm 110% extroverted. I love talking. And so that's my jam. And so I
I
put
can tell that.
together,
I can tell. I really can.
this presentation, you know, and what's interesting now looking back at it, actually, what's funny is I had my professor like hold my phone and we did Facebook Live on this presentation. And so there's times that I've watched it and I laugh at it now, knowing that it was so bad. It was good, but it was bad
I
because
was gonna ask you that. I was gonna
it,
ask you that.
now I've done so many more, you know, and um I'm working on perfecting the different things so it's not as rough and ragged and stuff like that. But it was just so powerful, you know? I mean, at that point, all I had done was gone to prison and was in college, you know? So I couldn't talk about the reentry work I've done. I couldn't talk about the policy work. I couldn't talk about doing a research fellowship with Yale and Columbia. You know, I didn't have all these other things that I've done. So here it is. I'm just talking about my story and being in college and the impact that education had while I was incarcerated, but also being able to come to school and to be accepted and to be welcomed and not to be other like, oh, watch out, there's David, you know, he's a felon, he's a convict, he's a murderer, he's this, he's that, you know. And it was so powerful, you know, and then the questions and just the conversations we had. And what's really funny is there was one white person, there was 20 Latinos and 10 blacks, you know? And so I'm like, what were y'all expecting today? So one of the Latina girls raised her hand and she's like, well, we were expecting somebody who was black and brown skin and went to prison for robbery or drugs. But our professor brought in a white dude that went to prison for murder. I'm just like, I was like, okay, that's a good way to put it, you know?
Yeah, I remember when I first talked to you and I asked you, I was like, I told you what I wanted to get into motivational speaking, and I told you I've never done this before, and you said, "Just keep at it." And I was like, "I'm going to bomb," and you was like, "Yeah, you are going to bomb." And you told me I can look back and I keep my old recordings, and I was horrible. And I took your advice and I listened to my very first podcast that I was on, and I was a stuttering, bumbling, just mess that I'm sure the host just deleted. I'm sure he just deleted, but he sent me the recording. And just like you told me, you just have to keep at it, and don't try to force something. I'm trying to remember the words you told me. Don't try to be someone you believe they want you to be. Be yourself and be authentic, and that's going to get you wins every single time. And I've been taking that to heart. So I really do appreciate that. Um, w- what is it you would want people to understand about speaking, sharing their lived experience about the power of your story, about the power of lived experience? What would be something you'd want people to know?
Um, I mean, one of the main things I'd want people to know about sharing their story is that there's so much power. I mean, each story is so different, you know. You might have different similarities with other people, but there's things that you've experienced that are going to provide freedom and healing to somebody that's hearing. You know, it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier. You know, when I talked at your conference, you know, I talked about scars, you know, because everybody, you know, the trauma that we've endured, you know, and as we're going through the healing journey, our scabs become scars, you know, and then we're able to go around, we're able to share our scars, you know, and there's somebody in that audience who has scabs. We don't know who it is, but they're taking this in, you know, they're seeing where we are, they're seeing where they were at one point, you know, and saying, wow, you know, I can do what Rustin's doing, I can do what David's doing, I can do this, I can do that, you know, and that's what's so powerful, you know, because we get to give hope to people who feel hopeless. We get to give people the ability to dream again who have forgotten how to dream and that dreams do come true, you know, and that's what's so powerful, you know. Just about everywhere I go, I have at least one person that comes up and talks to me about being sexually abused, you know, and I always tell them, I'm like, forget everybody else that's here. You're the reason that I'm here, you know, and we get to provide that space where they can begin that healing process. You know, we provide that opportunity to let somebody know what's possible, you know, that, wow, you know, I have a background, but that doesn't have to define me anymore. You know, I always tell people, you know, that we are our own author. We're writing our own story. We have a pen in our hand and we get to put a period where we want a chapter to end and then start the next chapter. But
Amazing.
another key thing is everything that's happened in our past, we get to define how it plays in our present and our future.
Exactly. Exactly. What I was thinking about something that you and I had a conversation about me speaking, and I told you I remember saying, David, I I just know that there just might be someone out there, and you interrupted me and you said might. We don't say might. There's going to be someone out there. That's what you say, Rusty. We don't have mites around here. We have, and that hit me really hard. That hit me really hard. And when I speak, whether it's at a conference or in a college or university, that is what gets me is I don't say the word, there just might be that one person that my story could help. There is that my story is going to impact that one person, and I'm waiting on that one person. And until I find that one person, I'm going to continue sharing my story. I'm going to continue letting people know that never let your past refine you, let it define you. And I learned that from you. You have been my mentor. You have, if I can get just a little bit personal, um, through all these years and you speaking, how do you keep sharing your story? Because your story is powerful, but how do you keep sharing your story and telling it over and over, the pain and without breaking down? Because I asked that, you was at my last conference, me just reading just one little chapter out of my book about my healing just broke me down, and my story is not even close to impactful as yours. So how do you keep telling it over and over without breaking down and blubbering like I do?
Well, the more you talk about it, the more power you have over that pain, that hurt, you know. And knowing that, you know, me being able to be an open book is healing somebody else, you know? Um, the second week I was at Eastern University, they put my story in the school paper. Now, I helped write the article, so it wasn't this like hit piece like, "Oh, y'all, you know, we got this person on campus. Y'all need to watch out for him." It was something that I helped write, you know, and up until the day that the paper came out, you know, I was like cool with it. But that morning, I was so scared, you know, because it's like I was gonna be butt booty naked in front of everybody. How are they gonna react to me? You know, what are they gonna think? But there were some girls that came up to me that talked about being abused themselves, you know, and because I was able to be so open about what I had experienced, they could talk about what they encountered, you know? And so it's always so powerful and healing to talk about what we've endured, you know, what we've gone through, you know, because we gain power over it. When you're silent, that hurt, that pain has power over you. But when you're able to get your voice back and you're able to talk about what's happened, you control the narrative now.
Amazing, amazing. David, if you were sitting across from
I'm
someone,
actually sitting right now. No.
oh, if you were sitting across someone right now who was getting close or just on the way out the door, that doesn't feel like they have any hope, they don't know what to do next, they don't have a blueprint. I share this a lot, but what would be something if you were sitting across them you would say?
I'd let them know that first, don't be afraid to ask for help. A lot of times, you know, people come out and they're very prideful and they don't want to ask for help. They don't want to let somebody know that they're struggling, that they need assistance. The other thing is I would let them know that they need a village. So we all know the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. My spin on that is it takes a village for somebody coming home from prison to be successful. So it takes a person's family, it takes the community, it takes employers, it takes landlords, it takes support groups, it takes a place of faith. All of these different entities walking together with this person gives that person the ability to succeed, because they're doing something that a lot of people in prison have never had before. And they're speaking life into this person. They're telling them that, Rustin, wow, you're getting ready to get out of prison. We believe in you. We're going to be here with you. We're going to walk with you. Whatever you need, we're going to be here to support you. We want to see you succeed. We want to see you be able to go to college because you can do it. We know you're going to get this job. And instead of tearing somebody down, you're building somebody up. You're allowing them to believe in themselves and to believe in their own ability and to see that potential in them, you know? And that potential has always been there, but at times we become blind to the potential because of what we've been told our whole life, how we're useless, we're worthless, we're never going to amount to anything. But now when we have somebody speaking life into us, those blinders are taken off and we're now able to see that potential and what we're able to achieve and do in life.
It's exciting. That is that is why I created Why Not Mindset, is to provide all the things that I didn't have, David, when I was released. You've watched this birth from an idea to a 501c3, because I want to provide all the things that I didn't have. I was 32 years old, released from prison, and had never filled out an application before. I didn't know any process, and they just gave me they gave me a bus pass. I stepped off a bus in a new town. I wasn't going back to my old town and had no clue what to do next. And they told me, you have 2 weeks to figure it out, or we're going to fill your bed and send you back to prison. So there I was with just that determination that I wasn't going to go back to my old life. But now what in the heck am I supposed to do? And I just said, why not keep pushing forward when the world taps you on the shoulder and says you're broken and says you can't make it? You just got to dig in, dig deep, and say, why not? Why not? David, this was very powerful. I really appreciate this. If someone is wanting to reach out to you and have you speak, if someone's wanting to reach out and have you speak at a university or speak at a conference, how can someone get a hold of you?
Well, I have a website, so it's www.davidlgarlock.com, and they can also send me an email at dgarlockspeaker@gmail.com. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and yes, I'm 46 years old with a TikTok.
I have a TikTok too. I have a TikTok too. I will make sure that all these links get put into this recording, and I will make sure I will. There, there's a banner I've seen. Unless you give me another one, I'll send you a banner. David, thank you so much for doing this recording with me. Thank you so much. This was powerful. I have been wanting to have you on my. I really wanted you to be on my first recording, but you are my fifth. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I think we're going to call this a wrap. And I really appreciate it, brother. Thank you for being a mentor, whether you knew it or not. You have been behind the scenes and given me so much encouragement, and you don't even know it. But thank you so much, brother. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you for stopping in.
Yep.